Tommy from Austin Mesh here, and Dave and I were chatting on Discord, just got connected, and Dave shared about some really interesting stuff he was doing up in his area about installing nodes around town and getting connected with various businesses and property owners and stuff. And that was a really common question that we see come up in Austin Mesh. It's like, how did you guys connect with so and so and this person? And when Dave came to me and was talking about it, I thought, hey, what a great opportunity for us to share um, with the community. So, yeah, Dave, introduce yourself real briefly and maybe a little bit of your background. Love to hear about your experience with Meshtastic and how you got started.
Sure. I'm Dave. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. Metro of about, I want to say 2 or 2.5, maybe even a little more, 3 million people. So pretty big
Wow.
place. Uh, and as far as radio goes, I have no real experience.
Yeah.
I own a couple Baofengs like everybody does these days, and learn how to use them and kind of learn the very basic ropes of the open ham channels, and eventually just bought a GMRS license because they're cheap, and learned the real basics about that kind of stuff. And probably, yeah, that was probably a little earlier. And then uh, probably about a year ago, it's what, August 2024 right now. uh, there were started to be kind of these inklings of this Meshtastic thing, which had already existed for a while, but I didn't know about it. And yeah, it had just started to kind of get hold of uh, for lack of a better term, YouTube, of people that were interested in radio stuff, or emergency communication and radio. Yeah, not quite as far as I could tell, like the hardcore radio people, because that's not me. I don't understand like the fundamentals of radio for the most part. Everything that I know now, I've learned in the last year or less. Uh, and I saw that kind of, the intro stuff from some American YouTubers, but a lot of European ones, because it was a little bigger there because of the more dense population,
Yeah.
and easier propagation of radio stuff there. And just kind of it took off, and I jumped on. A couple of my local friends, uh, who also aren't into radio in any way, were into just the concept. And so, just through talking with them, and then just doing the digging for myself for the most part, whether it was just Googling or digging through documents, or the firmware docs or whatever, just kind of jumped on. And the the DIY aspect of it is what really got me. I shouldn't say got me. I'm totally fine with buying pre-made stuff if it existed, but it doesn't for this. So,
Yeah.
with a very few exceptions. And so, I kind of by necessity figured out how to do some of the stuff that was needed.
Yeah.
I uh, decided I was going to be into it. Found probably Rockland, Rockland
Yeah.
.com, and they had what I consider to be an insanely cheap price on a couple of T-beams with batteries and no cases at the time. And I was like, what? These are like $30 a piece. Okay, I'll buy this. And did it. And I was like, this is going to be magic. And it was not magic. The videos and the YouTube and yeah, all the content that I'd seen before was just promising it to be like 20-mile mesh
Yeah.
networks that were, flawless. It was, I tried, the first thing I did was I put a T deck on my desk with a battery in it inside the house. I had no idea. Put the other one in my car and went to go get pizza. And I was like, this is gonna be sweet. The pizza place is like a mile away. And by the time I was 2 blocks away, I was getting nothing. And I'm like, it must be messed up. I don't know what I'm doing or whatever. And yeah,
Yeah.
that was my beginning. And I was just like,
Okay.
all right, this will be okay. I'll figure this out.
Yeah. So you mentioned having some friends around the area. Was that one of your first things was like, hey, how could I maybe connect with my friends on Meshtastic?
That was the initial thing, was and really still to this day is kind of the primary thing of how
Yeah.
do I, independent of cell and internet. I've been on the internet for a very, very long time, since dial-up was 2400 baud, literally. And,
Yeah.
the early 90s was my first internet stuff.
Yeah.
And cell phones since pretty much they were just outside of cars. And, I was interested in the aspect of that it doesn't need any of that stuff. And, obviously, like I said, the expectations are a little sky high when you hear about it at first, and you get kind of brought back down to earth, but
Yeah.
the concept is still there. And, I didn't actually, to my knowledge, I'm trying to remember, I didn't really know about any kind of mesh networking. I know there's other radio-based mesh networks that
Yeah.
are a little more ham band, and
Yeah.
some that are more long range, and whatever. I still don't know much about them. I know they exist, but
Yeah.
you know the thing that got me about this is that it's really the barrier to entry is really low. It's really cheap to get in, and you can you know do things yourself. You don't just have to go buy something. You do have to buy some things, but you don't have to buy, you know, a product for
Right.
necessarily. I mean, you do
Yeah.
buy products, but they're very tiny, and you put them together yourself, and
Yeah.
and
Very
you
cost
learn a
effective.
lot. Yeah, you learn a lot along the way. So it's
Yeah.
almost like education and a tool at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. So as you went about, trying to connect with your friends, how did you start like identifying what you thought might be key locations to actually bridge the gap to start creating that mesh?
It it took a while. It took in fact quite a while for me to first of all figure out what line of sight was.
Mm,
It's not, it doesn't make a lot of sense if you're in the you know modern technology world. You go, oh, radios just work, cell phones just work. It doesn't matter if I'm in a little valley, unless you're driving in the middle of Iowa or Nebraska or something like that, and there's no coverage. You're just like, it just works no matter where you are. And uh, Minnesota, where I am, is generally considered to be pretty flat, and it generally is pretty flat. But in the city here, it's not. There's a lot of hills and valleys. There's, Mississippi River rolls through, and there's, a giant river valley and bluffs everywhere. And I think the first time I tried to reach one of my friends, I gave him uh, a spare one of the two T beams that I initially got. I'm like, hey, we're going to use this. It'll totally work. He doesn't live that far away. He's probably, I don't know, 2.5 miles or something like that. But
yeah.
it's 2.5 miles of hills and trees and roads and buildings, and
Yeah.
and this didn't work at all. And so,
Yeah.
and I bet he hasn't turned his on since. But in the meantime, I've talked about it with him a lot, and he totally gets what it is and what it isn't. And another friend of mine has definitely gotten into it a lot more. Uh, a couple of friends have, and it's still, I find, especially, it's kind of odd. The more you know about networking technology, some of my friends are like high-end network,
Yeah.
been in the business for a really long time type
Yeah.
people, but not in radio, or anything to do with radio. It doesn't always click. You get
Mm,
the concepts, but you don't get the limitations quite as
yeah.
much, because we're used to wires connecting things, or 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi that goes through walls and
Yeah.
structures and hills and whatever else.
Yep.
And that's just not the case with this. So
Yeah.
on top of the fact that the underlying technology is based on ultra cheap devices that don't really have any storage, or basically hitting the reboot button
Mm,
happens every couple of minutes, in
yeah.
some
Yeah.
situations, and
Yeah.
it loses everything except for, the some of the basic settings. Yeah, that concept is, even to people who were, in the old school BBS days like myself and several of my friends,
Yeah.
it's a little foreign, because you're like, wait, hold on, the whole chat room just went away. The room is still over there, but there's no history, there's no nothing,
Yeah.
and that's with a lot of modern technology, and several social media things that I think have maybe either dead or mostly dead since then. The whole "there's no history" thing
Mm,
was a feature,
yeah.
and
Yeah. For
and now
sure.
it's like, no, that's just reality.
Yeah.
That's how this works.
Yeah.
And that in itself can be a little bit of a turnoff to people, because they're like, well, what if you don't see my message? And it's like, you have to adjust the way that you communicate with this
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah,
and
that's very
adjust your
different.
expectations for sure.
So you mentioned, kind of like finding some hills and valleys and buildings and stuff between y'all. How did you start identifying like, okay, I want to try and get a node here. And then, once you identify that, how do you even start approaching someone like a business owner or like a building manager? I don't even know, who do you talk to?
The first thing I did, and this was just by sheer chance, really, is I realized that I live in a geographic bowl. My house is in a in a bowl, and
Yeah,
so I started sending messages out to where I thought I'd get I'd put a note at my house, and I'd just go do my errands or drive to get lunch or whatever, and I
yeah,
do little pings here and there, and I go, man, I got nothing, or it works on this line of sight and nothing else, and eventually figured out, okay, when this I'm in a geographic bowl and the signal can't get out very easily.
yeah,
Uh, and so I figured out, okay, well, I need to have something at the top of the bowl, and then
yeah,
something to get outside. These things that now you'd consider relatively basic if you're kind of into it. And that's when I was like, okay, so I need to go higher. I need to get up above things, and I mean, immediately started thinking, well, if I didn't know anybody, I happen to have a friend who lives at the top of literally like the lip of the bowl,
oh,
who's
perfect.
only 4 or 5 blocks away.
Yeah,
And I'm like, hey, what if I put a note on the back of his house, and and kind of use that to slingshot out, and did exactly that. And that was the first node that I put up.
okay,
And most of us have friends that live relatively close by, and you can just go,
yeah,
hey, do you mind if I stick this thing to your house, and I'll give you a little radio that you can use if you ever want to. And that was the first natural progression towards doing it. I think that's probably what most people's first thing will be, even if they don't live in a bowl, even if they live on a hill or whatever.
yeah,
They're like, well, I'm not talking to anybody, maybe I should give my friend a node. And it's a little bit of a hard sell. Even though the devices are cheap and whatever, it's not the first in everybody's mind, especially people that aren't already into nerdy stuff.
mhm, yeah,
Pardon the phrase, but it's totally nerdy.
oh yeah,
And so it kind of goes from there, and you go, okay, well, I got it in my bowl, and then you go, okay, well, where can I get with this? And so
mhm,
you're doing your normal daily things. You go, okay, hey, now I'm like a mile or two from my friend's house. I wonder if I can still communicate with my house. And you can start getting the concept of mesh in that way.
yeah,
And you go, okay, well, it worked up until I got to the grocery store, and then it just completely faded out. And so it's like, okay, well, maybe where would I put a node if I were, and you're driving around looking everywhere, like you're in the middle of the city, and this is actually one of the things that I think is kind of ignored through most of the Meshtastic community, is that it's there's a big following in Europe, and I totally get that, but they're really packed together there, and so you can just have
yeah,
really big functional meshes with like just people walking around with a pocket node,
yeah,
because there might be 20 in a mile or two.
yeah,
That is definitely not the case in America. And on top of that, we have, we're more spread out. Our geography is different.
mhm,
Our buildings are different. We have, varying degrees of, foliage and
yeah,
whatever else it is. And so uh, you go, okay, well, where can I put something like this? There's nothing here but houses and trees, and a grocery store and a gas station or whatever. And you know, with the exception of you get out into the suburbs, and usually you come across 2, 3, 4 story office buildings here and
yeah,
there.
yeah,
And I happen to be in one. I rent office
okay,
space about, I think it's, as the crow flies, it's 7 miles from my house, and it's not a flat trajectory. There are hills and buildings and stuff in
mhm,
the way. And uh and so when I just decided I want to try something a little further, longer range, I emailed the landlord of my office building. I said, hey, uh, I'd like to put in, and I thought about it quite a bit before I asked, because I didn't want to say, I want to put a Meshtastic device on my roof. I said, you know, now he knew I'm a web developer.
okay,
That's the partial
yeah,
purpose of my office. And I said, "Hey, I have a networking device I want to put on the roof so I can, test some things out, from a net, I just said networking. That's
Yeah.
most people understand what that is or what it
Yeah.
entails. And in order to make it more attractive, and this is the case for, the huge amount of most of the nodes, I I knew I was like, okay, there's no way. You look on the top of any building, there's antennas. There's antennas everywhere.
Yeah.
And by deduction, you can go. Those probably have power going to them. And on the top of a roof,
Yep.
you're like, the last thing any landlord wants to hear is, "I want to drill a hole in your roof,
Right.
power
Right.
to it." And so I said, well, it's solar powered. It requires no network connection. It requires, it's just a box on your roof. And I didn't have to, give them a spiel or anything. I just said it, there's a networking device I'd like to put on the roof. I barely ever need to go up there to except to do some updates. And I'm already a tenant to the building. And he, yeah, said, sure, yeah, why not? Go ahead.
Yeah.
And so I went up there, and the building maintenance guy, has to be there to unlock the door for me and or whatever.
Yep.
Uh, got up there. There were already antennas. There was like an old school TV, super. I don't even know what you call them. Like it's a Yagi of some sort, but
Yeah. Yeah.
super old looking antenna. But it had a huge mast on it. I'm like, I'm using that.
Oh, nice.
And so, and I could tell it clearly wasn't being used. I mean, there's no over-the-air TV anymore. At least not analog like that.
Yeah.
And so I strapped the node to that, and it's been up ever since.
That's
And
awesome.
it works great. And so, that's not everybody's situation. I know that you're not already the tenant of a commercial building, but you never know if you work in a building that has 3, 4, 5 story roof, and you
Yep.
think that you have an in with the janitor or whatever, the maintenance
Yeah.
guy, and they're cool with you. Say, hey, is it okay if I put a radio device on the roof that's has no power going to it, and I might need to go see it once every couple of months to make sure everything's okay? They may very well let you.
Yeah.
They're obviously they're going to have safety concerns, of you being on the roof, but it's like,
Sure.
they more often than not will just go up with you. You just
Yeah.
be like, put this here, or I'm going to strap this to this pole or something like that.
Yeah.
Over and done.
Yeah.
And you will have to go back to it every now and then if there's an issue, or if you have to do a software update, or if something
Mm.
happens or something like that. But it's nothing to go up to the roof once every few months and just
Yeah.
change something real quick.
Yeah. So you mentioned your office. Have you had any luck reaching out to, like other office buildings or any other kind of, I don't know, like a coffee shop or anything like that at this point?
Yeah, and some of it is who you know,
Yeah.
as opposed to what you know. And so
Yeah.
I have friends that work in the commercial real estate industry. And they're like, hey, I said, hey, any place you think I can put a radio on top of your buildings? And he's like, oh, I got this one here, this one here. We got our home office, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And obviously, that's a huge advantage to know someone that's in a
For
situation
sure.
like that. Well, where they'll let you on the roof. You
Yeah.
know, uh,
Yeah.
it, it obviously, to a limit. They're not going to let you go on some skyscraper because they don't have a third story lease in the middle, or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But that kind of thing is obviously something, you may not know it. You may not know or understand or realize that your friend has something like that.
Mm. So
But
you have,
if you're paying attention to maybe what their job is, you go, oh, hey, you manage a shopping center. Can I get on the roof?
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and
All it
and
takes
ours,
is asking. Yeah.
yeah, and that's honestly, that's the real thing, is that you just have to ask. The
Yeah.
worst thing they're going to say is, no, I can't.
Yeah.
And if you call the leasing office of a building that you're like, hey, that place has a sweet vantage point. I should just call and say, hey, would you care if I put a radio on your roof that doesn't need
Yeah.
any power or anything?
Yeah.
What are they going to say? No.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they go, sure, here, talk to the owner, and
Yeah.
it, that can actually hapen. It's not
Have you gotten
unheard
any
of.
like really hard no's where people are like, what are you talking about? And like
I
really
haven't.
skeptical? No,
Not
that's
at
awesome.
all.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you're usually going to talk to the receptionist or something like that.
Yeah.
And, so what they'll end up doing is, talk to the guy that owns it, or the person or the company or whatever that
Yeah.
has that ownership stake. And, you know, I think more often than not, you're just not going to hear back, and that's just a thing. That's uh, you're not AT&T, you're not Verizon. When
Right.
those guys, those companies are paying thousands of dollars a month to rent roof space on building.
Yeah.
So, and you're not that. And so, what I would do is come at it from the perspective of, hey, I'm a radio enthusiast, or I'm in a club that or a group that just is all about doing this, meshing computers with radios. And some people will have a liking to that and be like, yeah, sure, go ahead, whatever. And it's especially when you say it's not, it's literally just going to sit there. It's
Yeah.
not going to, there's no holes in your roof. It's clamped to whatever pole is sitting there, and there's, you know, half a dozen poles on the top of every building. There just are.
Yeah.
Or any metallic
Always.
surface. It's like it'll be magnetically attached to this. It's solar. There'll be nothing, you know, that's a big draw to people where they're just like, yeah, it doesn't bother me. It's no problem.
Yeah.
And it helps if you have an in with the building, whether it's, you already rent there, or you're a client of a business that's there and you come
Sure.
in a lot or something like that. Like I said, the worst thing they can say is no.
Yeah.
And, so what? They won't remember you. If you're the guy that came in and said, can I put something on your roof? And you're not like, can I put something on your roof, man?
Yeah. Just just gotta act normal and yeah, be like a nice human, as
yeah,
you talk to them. That's awesome.
exactly. And
So go ahead.
oh, go ahead. I didn't
No,
want to
I was
interrupt.
just gonna say like there, I mean, I think you touched on so many interesting pieces in there from like kind of how to make that initial approach and like how to phrase it, talking about just a piece of networking gear and emphasizing it's solar, it needs no power, there's no dependencies. And you even mentioned like some of the big guys like AT&T or whoever who are paying thousands of dollars, right? Mostly what they're paying for is access and power, right? They're paying
Mhm.
so they can access it 24/7. Well, ours is not critical, right? So every couple months, maybe not even that, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, you can seriously not go up for months at a time if you build the
yeah,
node right. It's
yep,
going to be indefinite, even, here in Minnesota where we don't get as much sunlight,
yeah,
or it may get covered up with snow for a while or something like
sure,
that. It's like, if you build it to be able to last, a month or two without any sun, which
yeah,
is not impossible to do,
yeah,
so it'll just keep going, you
yep.
know?
That's really cool. Yeah, I think you touched on like so many great pieces of questions I've been asked over time of like, I don't even know how to do this. And if I do talk to him, what do I say? And yeah, that's great. So as you think about the future then of the mesh in Minneapolis, St. Paul, like, is it more the same thing? Do you think it's going to change? What are you thinking about?
Uh, it's definitely changing. It's changing now.
Mm,
When I first started out, I kind of thought, and I was sort of right, that I was the only person doing this in the
yeah,
entire metro. It turns out I was slightly wrong. There are the learning curve is steep, first of all. Uh, Specifically, not necessarily as much for the radio tech, but for the firmware and
yeah,
interface tech. Uh, the documentation is okay, but it doesn't tell you a lot of things, and so there are a lot of kind of pitfalls and gotchas about setting things up where, and I actually think it's more dangerous if you kind of know what you're doing in a computer sense,
mm,
or a regular networking sense,
yeah,
or if you've been around chat rooms for a long time. You get this device and you go, oh geez, I can set my own chat room names, I can set my own channels. And maybe I'm the only one. It was the first thing I did.
yeah,
I was like, well, I don't want long fast. That's not a name I would name a chat room. And
yep,
so I immediately called it like public chat, and then I changed, made some private rooms, whatever, and everything
yep.
worked just fine through my own
Beam.
devices.
Yeah,
But I had no idea that had changed the frequency that my radios were using.
yeah,
And so I
yeah.
was like, man, I am the only person in the entire metro area using this thing. This is like a big nothing.
How long did it
Uh,
take you to figure that out?
it was not that long ago that I figured that out, probably 3 months.
Amazing.
And it wasn't, I'm one of the things I do professionally is I'm an interface guy.
Okay.
And so, I have ideas and opinions about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so when I found out you know, I was like, it was never even remotely obvious to me that creating a new
Yeah.
channel, uh, even though I was careful to use the same encryption key and all this
Sure.
other stuff, I was like,
Yep.
oh, this will totally. And I'm also pretty sure that I asked in either in the
Yeah.
Discord or somewhere else, probably a forum or something like that.
Yeah.
Hey, if I put the encryption key to AQ equals equals, am I still going to be okay here?
Yeah.
And people said yes, and I'm like,
Yeah.
sweet, all right, no
Sweet.
problem. I just didn't want Longfest to be the channel name.
Yeah.
And boom, I had, without any indication on any of the hardware or any of the apps, I was on a completely different radio
Yep.
frequency.
Yep.
And I didn't find out until I hooked up an SDR and went, why is nothing coming through on where I think it's supposed to be coming through?
Oh, that's
Found out where my frequency was and went, oh, I'm on 26.
huh.
After looking up enough documentation, I'm on
Yeah.
I'm on 912,875 or something like that,
Yeah.
and then find out where I was supposed to be in order to get stuff. And I was like, all of a sudden, nodes started popping up. That not like crazy, but enough
Yeah.
that I was like, I was just doing it wrong this whole time.
Yeah. So if you
And
pull out your app right now, how many active nodes would you see on your list?
uh, well, that's another point of contention for me, is
Okay.
that I really wish, and don't let me turn this into a railing against the the developer community or anything like that.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan that your node list is device dependent. I understand that it sort of
Oh,
has to
sure.
be,
Yeah.
but I really wish that you could be like, hey,
User. Yeah.
I know that this place that I am right now can pick up these nodes.
Hmm.
Can I please just move this to this device? And so they don't have to discover them all independently.
Sure.
Uh, but anyway, it used to be probably two or three in my area,
Yeah.
and a couple kept popping up and disappearing, or whatever. And now it's getting close to 20 or 30,
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
and a lot of that's because I connected with people on the Discord that were like, hey, the people finally started showing up almost out of nowhere, where
Mhm.
I'd been going to this empty Discord room and just going, anybody here, anybody here, anybody here, like every few weeks, and there
Yeah.
was never anybody. One person showed up once, and they were in the Mankato, which is hours away,
Mm.
or hour and a half or something like that. And there's
Yeah.
very little chance of getting radio out there, of
Yeah.
course, from
Yeah.
that kind of distance. And once it's a mesh, so once things start to grow a little bit, they grow a lot. It's
They
just how they
do.
work.
Yeah.
And so just between the myself and probably five or six other people, maybe as many as 10, uh, we've got probably 30 40% of the entire metro covered,
Wow.
mostly on one side, because we a
Yeah.
lot of us are I'm on kind of the central eastern side of the metro, and some of their people are up in the north, some people are down in the south, but we don't have many in the west.
Okay.
Those kind of things grow.
Yeah.
And we do have some geographic weirdness between the east and west, because that's the Mississippi River divides them, so there's a river valley.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But yeah, it's and with with these connections of people, it grows. You start to get know people that have access, you know, and they don't just know the technology, but they're like, well, yeah, I work in buildings. I can get on the roof anytime I want. And so you go, well, it's an apartment building. Well, here, have this node, throw this on top of the elevator stack, and boom,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you've covered, 5 square miles of area,
Yep.
that's
Another
not bothering
section.
anybody,
Yeah.
and it becomes part of the mesh, and you can actually grow it pretty quickly. Now then you've got 30 or 40 nodes that are popping up all of a sudden, because they would have been you know in the trees, or behind a bunch of buildings,
Yep.
yesterday, and all of a sudden they're visible because you've got something that's 100 feet up in the air,
Yeah.
doing the repeating.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, it's cool to hear that it's growing there. It's definitely growing in Austin. We have lots of little pockets around Austin where up north there's probably 40, maybe 50. Out east there's probably another 20. Southwest there's probably another 40. South there's probably 20, but they're all kind of just their own pockets. We have a really challenging topography here. Um, and yeah, working on getting all that tied together. And yeah, that's part of the fun too, is just figuring out where to put stuff and who to talk to and get new people in. And
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a real challenge, especially in a dense city.
Yeah.
is like, how do I, how do I get to this part if I don't have a direct connection?
Yeah.
And you kind of work your way around. You go, okay, well, I can get to this spot, and then you go, okay, well, what's in that spot? And you can, and
Yeah.
every time you do that, it's not just like you're drawing a straight line like a
No,
network cable. You're
no,
drawing
you kind
you're
of zigzag all
yeah,
over. Yeah.
but
I
you're
love
also
that.
covering areas that you weren't
Yeah.
anticipating covering
On
as
the way.
well. So
Yeah.
it works really well like that.
Yeah. One of the things you said that I made me chuckle was just about how like once you start kind of like checking if it works from, on your daily commute or whatever, you're getting pizza here and you kind of like check it. Then you start looking everywhere you go. You're just like, oh, I could put a node there. Ooh, that would be a good spot for a node. So the folks from Austin Mesh and my friends who are into it, we joke about how we can't go anywhere anymore without being
Uh,
like, oh, that's a great spot for a node. It's like, what has my life become that I'm just looking for high places to stick nodes?
That's,
Yeah.
I'm the same way, and actually, I'm almost to the point of saying I was the same way,
Mm,
because we're getting enough coverage that I don't have to look anymore for
that's awesome.
in several places. I'm just like, I know this is covered. There's,
Yeah.
it's like double or triple covered,
Yeah.
which is
That's
even
cool.
better. And it it's something that I found about, the urban or city environment
Yeah.
is that there just is not much information about,
Mm,
you how you can do something like that. There's,
yeah.
I'm sure there's a ton of like commercial information on how to do, because like Minneapolis has citywide Wi-Fi, where
Really? Wow.
there's I don't know
Okay.
how 100% coverage they have, but it's like most of like the streetlight poles and
Okay.
telephone poles have just giant, you know, like nodes of Wi-Fi all over
Wow.
them, and
Wow.
they look like satellites are crashing into the earth. It's like it's pretty nasty.
Yeah.
But you're like, okay, well, you can see how that works, and it's on a block by block basis. But that's got stronger signal. It has way higher bandwidth needs
Yeah.
and considerations and stuff like that. But you can kind of go, okay, what if they can do it, I can do it. And
Yeah.
and we don't have it in St. Paul, even though we share a border with the
Yeah.
city. And obviously nobody's interneting on Meshtastic. That would be the worst
Right.
experience ever.
Right. Yeah. That'd be
But
not fun.
but you can get a reasonably reliable network by using the same kind of
Yeah.
infrastructure, and just go, hey, I've got a pole in front of my house, and it's way taller than my roof.
Yeah.
And if I could get something up there that would just, boost the signal a little bit, that'd be
Yeah.
great. And
Yeah.
that kind of thing is totally possible without being in anybody's way or, causing trouble or anything like that. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's
That's
kind of neat
awesome.
the things you can do uh, uh, slightly outside of the box.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing your experience and it's really fun to hear about another city like getting such great coverage and uh, yeah, I hope we can see that pop up in more and more cities in the US. So,
I think so too.
any I don't know, last things you'd want to share with anybody watching, encouragement or information or
Yeah, don't use router client mode
yeah,
ever,
yeah. Yeah, that
unless
is
you're on
true.
top of a skyscraper.
Yeah.
Uh, we've got a pretty strong mesh going right now. And every now and then you'll find someone that's like, hey, they just found out about the hobby. Great, that's awesome. And they got 5 nodes and they put them all on router client and they put them in their house. And it's like, no, don't do that, please,
Yeah.
no. That,
Yeah.
that,
Creating dead
it,
ends.
well, and we're actually trying to come up with a way to get around that. And one of the ways that we've come up with, or two of the ways we've come up with, one is, hey, if you have a spare node sitting around and you're okay just letting it kind of be of service, literally name it something like don't use router client mode,
Yeah.
and make sure it
Yeah.
gets propagated. And then that's the easy one. But the other thing is we're setting up a couple of nodes. I'm not sure who's doing it or how and why just yet, or how and where just yet. But basically, they'll be like help nodes, kind of like a BBS, but not.
Yeah.
Where all they're going to do is spam the long fast channel every, you know 4 hours or something like that, and say, hey, need some tips on networking or something like that, and literally just have either a link to,
Yeah.
an informational website that it tells you how to do. Because when you get them, you're in the Wild West, and everybody thinks they
Yep.
and this isn't a slight against people that start because we all start somewhere.
Yeah.
They go, oh, every network needs a router. And
Yeah.
so they
Exactly.
go, set one of these to router. And they have no idea what they did.
Yeah.
And what's ironic is the better your mesh is, the more damage it does to have a router in there that's not.
Absolutely. It really does. Yeah. It takes it down.
And so we have a house with four routers in it that's somewhere nearby, and I'm like, and so I'm like, I go through and I DM like every
Yeah.
day. I copy and paste the same DM because
Yeah.
it does, it's not always getting to them,
Yeah. Yeah.
saying, hey, how's it going, buddy? Uh, Please change your client mode, your mode to client, and
Yeah.
we can all have a better mesh. And
Yeah.
one of them changed one day, and I was like, yes, I did it, and then the rest didn't. So
Well, that's good information. All right. Well, I'm sure if anybody has questions for you, they can drop them in the comments here, or I'm sure they can find either of us on Discord. We're both in the main one, and yeah. Well, thanks so much for the time, and yeah, I hope you keep on meshing and everything grows for you guys up there.
sounds good. Thanks for having me.